and welcome to UFO Sightings by Astronauts. With today's video, I wanted to step outside of the realm of cryptids that our channel seems highly focused on as of late, and look at something that many of you enjoy: UFOs. More importantly, these UFO sightings aren't from normal citizens watching the night skies, but are from the men and women who have spent time around the stars, or more simply put, astronauts. Most people are highly critical of sightings from normal people, but it is really thought-provoking when it comes from someone trained to deal with living or visiting space. On a side note, I do want to make something involving ghosts soon, but I need to find a few stories that are really unique. So without further ado, let's turn our eyes to the sky and discover what secrets the astronauts have held. I wanted to take a moment and mention that with this topic, there is a really unique set of circumstances that occur with a few of these sightings. Many times I saw particular reports coming from astronauts claiming they saw a UFO, only to find out that those reports were false. Due to this, I will make every attempt to mention this in any of the stories that I share, or outright omit the entry if the whole thing was from the imagination of someone else. So starting off chronologically, our first sighting came from a man named Deke Slayton, who went by the nickname Deke. Early in his career, he served in the United States Air Force, where he attained the rank of major and did tours during World War II. After this, he was selected to take part in the Mercury program with NASA. Deke would later become the NASA's Chief of the Astronaut Office and later Director of Flight Crew Operations. So it can be inferred that this man was highly qualified. During his time in the Air Force, he came across an encounter that would haunt him for the rest of his life. On December 5, 1951, Donald was flying an F-51 Mustang for the purposes of testing for maintenance. During this flight, it took him over Hastings, Minnesota, and it was expected to be nothing outside of being routine. Donald stated it was a sunny day afternoon, and he had just turned his plane to head back to Holman Field when he noticed a white object approaching him. Originally he thought it was simply a kite, but knew that it couldn't be the case since he was flying at 10,000 feet. Then he assumed it appeared to be a weather balloon, and decided to close in on the object just to check it out for fun. It was at that moment he realized the object wasn't a balloon, but was saucer-shaped, and no matter how much he tried to get close to it, it kept pulling away. During the chase, he stated his plane was going 280 miles an hour, but the craft kept pulling away, and was rising in the air at a 45-degree angle at the same time. Finally, he realized he wouldn't be able to catch up to it, and decided to return to base. For fear of being thought crazy, he kept the sighting to himself for at least 2 days. Finally, he was in the officers' club drinking with his boss, who was a colonel, and got up the courage to discuss with him what he had seen. Suddenly, he was informed that he needed to speak to intelligence and make a report. The next day, he did as he was ordered, and he stated that the intelligence officers kept nodding their heads and taking notes while he told them the story. After it was all said and done, they informed him that on that day, a local company had sent up high-altitude weather balloons for research purposes. They had a small plane in the air observing them, and a car on the ground watching as well. During this study, both pilot and groundman saw the same object he had seen fly up to the balloons, hover for a second or two, and then take off with a great amount of speed. They were able to track the object using a theodolite and calculated the craft's speed at 4,000 miles per hour. Donald stated that this admission was basically used to let him know he wasn't crazy. What is really interesting is that this report found its way into Project Blue Book, but was originally written off as nothing to be concerned about, until they realized the man reporting the event had an above-average aptitude for flying and knowing what should and shouldn't be in the sky. Not to mention that being as he served as a test pilot for all types of classified aircraft, he would be fairly aware of what devices the US currently had, within reason. I always try to provide all possible information with stories like this, and so I looked up what planes would be available at that time that would easily outpace an F-51 Mustang. I found that in June of 1951, the Bell X-5 was being tested, and according to the records, only 2 were produced. This craft is all white in color, has a UFO appearance from looking straight on, and could fly at altitudes of 40,000 feet with a top speed of 716 miles an hour. Due to only 2 of these existing, it is possible that Donald could have seen this craft. But the United States Air Force Intelligence Office did state the craft hovered for a while before taking off again, and the Bell X-5 couldn't do that. Our next 2 stories are about pilots who are technically considered astronauts since they flew the NASA and United States Air Force owned X-15, which was a hypersonic craft that was designed to reach an altitude that was considered the edge of outer space. Joseph Albert Walker was a captain while serving in the United States Air Force and saw tours in World War II. After that, he became a test pilot, where in that time he successfully made 3 separate flights, reaching over 50 miles above the Earth's surface. On May 11th of 1962, he reported his first sightings of UFOs during a meeting with the National Conference of the Peaceful Uses of Space Research. It was at this event that he stated he had encountered 2 disc-shaped objects while flying, and had actually recorded the encounter on film. Previously, in April of the same year, he also mentioned that during one of his X-15 flights, he captured images of at least 5 cylindrical crafts, as well as other saucer-shaped objects. He went on record as saying he didn't want to speculate about the things he saw, but all he knew was what he saw when the film was developed. Then on July 17, 1962, another pilot by the name of Major Robert White came in contact with what he described as a grayish-colored craft that was only 30 to 40 feet away from his X-15. At the time, he was flying at an altitude of 58 miles above the Earth, and he stated on the radio that he didn't know what the craft was. It should be stated that all films from these events were never released to the public. Now we move on to one of the misconstrued stories I mentioned previously. Leroy Gordon Cooper, Jr., nicknamed Gordo, served in the United States Marine Corps during World War II, and then moved into the United States Air Force as a fighter pilot. A few years later, he was selected to be an astronaut and took part in the Mercury program. With this role, he flew the last solo orbital mission with the Mercury Atlas 9. Gordo then moved to the Gemini program. Here is where things become tricky. Most places claim that during his Mercury mission, he saw a green glowing object approaching his craft, and it was even picked up by radars in Moochea, which is near Perth, Australia. The problem is that Cooper himself denied the story and claimed that he wished it were true, but it was simply made up. I know many of you probably are thinking the same thing I was. He was covering it up. However, I actually believe him, since he was an avid UFO supporter and would spend a good portion of his life being very vocal on the fact that information is being hidden away from the public eye by both the military and NASA. While he denied the Mercury story, he fully admitted that during his tour in World War II, while flying over Germany in 1950, he did encounter something odd. A strange anomaly was reported on the radars, and the Air Force sent up a squadron of fighter planes to check it out, which included Cooper. He stated that what they found was a group of unknown silver saucer-shaped craft with no wings flying in a pattern. At first he thought they could have been unknown craft from the Soviets, but later realized it was more than likely extraterrestrial. Leroy stated that their planes could not keep up with the UFOs, so they were never able to ascertain what they were. Later, Cooper was working with a filming crew at Edwards Air Force Base, and he stated that an unknown ship landed at the base briefly before taking off again. The whole event was recorded, and he handed in the films to a high-ranking officer, and they were never seen again. Moving on, a crew in the Gemini program, which included Brigadier General James Alton McDivitt and Lieutenant Colonel Edward Higgins White II, had a strange encounter as well. I will save you from me mentioning their accolades prior to being an astronaut, as I have previously mentioned, due to it being fairly obvious by this point that the people in these stories are highly qualified. In June of 1965, while aboard the Gemini 4, James saw a cylindrical white object pass by one of the windows of the shuttle. Edward was asleep at the time, but James stated that the craft was shut down when he saw this anomaly, and it also had a long arm on it that stuck out of the side. He was unsure if the object was small but very close up, or very big and far away. James tried to take a picture of what he saw, but said the glare from the sun made it very difficult. Many claimed that what he saw was orbital debris or even the booster rocket, but he firmly denied this, stating it was part of his training to know what those things looked like, and this wasn't it. Even as such, the official explanation is that it was a booster rocket. Some state that James always assumed it was simply a satellite or other debris, but I question this, due to if that were the case, why would he react like he did to the point of wanting to take photographs of it? In that same year, in December, Navy Captain James Arthur Lovell Jr. and United States Air Force Colonel Frank Frederick Borman II had a similar experience while aboard the Gemini 7. On the second day of their planned 14-day flight, they noticed several objects, which he called bogies, 3 to 4 miles away from the ship flying away. The control center at Cape Kennedy stated that what they saw was either their booster rocket or particles from that. However, Borman stated he could see the rocket tumbling away from them, and the objects were nowhere near that location. Some have speculated that what was actually seen was ice particles, but I would assume that phenomenon would be fairly well known by this point. Not all sightings are from the US space program, since there are 2 interesting sightings from cosmonauts as well. A colonel in the Russian Air Force named Viktor Afanasyev had a strange sighting as well. I must advise you to take this report with a grain of salt, since the dates are not matching up at all. It claims his encounter occurred in April of 1979, but in looking up his bio, he served as a test pilot at Valery Chekolov Test Institute between 1977 and 1988. Viktor didn't start training for space travel until 1985. So take that for what it is, I guess. According to the story, he states that while in space, he saw an alien craft turn and approach his, and it followed him while keeping 25 to 29 meters distance from his ship. It states that he did photograph the craft and claimed it was 40 meters long, but that film was later confiscated. I see in rereading this, I suppose this event could have happened during his test flight years, and not while in space, but it does make it confusing. On the flight to the Mir space station in 1990, Gennady Mikhailovich Strekalov, who was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union twice, had his own encounter. During this trip, he as well as others on his crew saw a perfectly round shiny sphere leave the Earth's atmosphere just over Newfoundland. He states that they saw it fly around for 10 seconds and then it just disappeared. They reported deciding to mission control, but stated it was an unusual phenomenon, rather than saying UFO, due to them not knowing who was listening to their reports. Finally, I'm going to end this on the topic that many of you probably assumed would be in this video by the name of the title. The only thing is I'm including it for posterity, but you will soon see there's quite a bit of issues with it. I, of course, am talking about the supposed hijacked recordings from Apollo 11, where it is claimed Neil Armstrong radioed back to Mission Control, saying they saw alien craft on a nearby crater, and that they were watching them. I would tell you the whole story in verbatim, but I am sure many, if not all of you, are aware of it. The issue is a bit twofold with this. On one side, many trace the story back to a man named Otto Binder, a comic book author and UFO enthusiast, who many believe put this story out as a hoax. I normally would doubt this, but I have seen many reports where people listening to the radio transmissions heard exactly what everyone else was hearing at that time, with the omission of anything UFO or alien related. So in that, it is a smoking gun. However, in reading Q&As from NASA officials at Mission Control at that time, I also draw a question. They claimed NASA has zero interest in UFOs, and if one was spotted during a mission, they wouldn't give it too much thought, since it wasn't part of their goals. I find this really hard to believe, especially with early space programs where little was known as to what they would find out there. They also claimed that no secret, or dare I say off the record, line existed outside of one for medical purposes. It is stated that they could delay the feed for only a minute in case of a disaster that they didn't want to air live. So maybe I am a little bit too conspiracy minded when it comes to NASA, but are we to believe that no systems are in place just in case something like a UFO appears? In ending this video, I hope you enjoyed this topic, and I know I missed quite a few sightings, as well as the famous negative pyramid photo, but I try to keep things within a certain time frame. I am deeply honored and thrilled with how many views my videos have been getting as of late, and I couldn't be more thankful. Again, I was unable to reply to comments from last week, but I promise to get back with you all. If you haven't yet done so, do please consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. Also, I would greatly appreciate it if you could share my videos with someone you know who may be interested in this type of genre. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.